court-ordered therapy at the highest level, and there's an outline of it. My kids were sexually assaulted by their father, and he had weapons. He threatened to kill me. He threatened to kill the kids, but then the court ordered them to reunify with their sex offender, which ended up, my daughter ended up, had to go to Butler Hospital to be stabilized, and now all three of us are disabled. So, the bills that this psychologist created, he was contracted by the state, okay, which is a court-ordered contractor, psychotherapist, being paid by the federal money that comes into the state to be a contracted psychotherapist, and he was billing commercial insurance companies, so, and fudging the diagnosis codes, so it's fraud.
Mm-hmm. One more. Okay. Hi, I'm Io Griffin with Senator Whitehouse.
Kathy Lee, good to see you.
Good to see you.
But there's a lot of fraud. There's a lot of guardian ad litems that are fraudulently making women go through psych-eval after psych-eval after psych-eval. There's women that have spent $60,000 on a psych-eval and are sent to these two psychiatrists that are court-ordered, that are contracted by the state. And there's been illegal gag orders. I had an illegal gag order that I couldn't speak about what was going on about this, or I would be thrown in jail by protecting my kids. The psychotherapy threatened if I didn't get those kids in there, that a negative report would be sent to the judge, Giambra, because he knows her very well. A lot of the women were thrown in jail. These are professional women that never had a background, never was arrested, and I'm convinced that the way they do this is we have to, when we file for divorce, to get away from our abusers and our sex offenders and the pedophiles that are taking our kids, they know exactly how many assets you have. They know your home because we have to fill out a DR6, a financial statement. And like I said, there's 15 women that will come forward that are on that tape.
That's not all of them.
That's not, those are the ones.
There's thousands.
There's people that will not come forward because they're the fear is instilled in them by the judges and by the guardian ad litems.
I'm not sure if you've ever heard of the situation that's going on.
No. I mean, so have you've had a similar situation, or
This has been going on for a while.
All three of us.
Yeah, we're not. I just want to let you know that this is something I think that we realize that no one knows what's going on,
Right.
Because they've kept it so quiet.
Secret
and
and
it is
fear.
going on, not just in Rhode Island. It's every state. My situation is international. I was living abroad for 20 years, and I was in Germany. Mine came across really quickly. My husband, at the time, who is a German, I left and moved to Germany in 1994. So I was no longer living in the States. But I am from Rhode Island. Originally, my parents, I continued to have a mailing address there for American credit cards, and I traveled all the time back and forth because my business was in Munich, but I dealt with Americans in New York. I graduated from RISD. I'm a fashion designer, a very successful one. So it's not like, high honors. I mean, you name it. My background is impeccable. But for me to suddenly find out, I come from a normal family, high school, cheerleader, the whole thing, and then come to find out there's this whole other world that's going on. That was shocking for me, and most people just can't imagine that this stuff exists. Especially, I was just shocked to know that this stuff has been going on for years now. So when it happened to me, I was just, I came to Rhode Island for 2 weeks vacation. I was separated already with my husband in Munich. I was not divorced yet. I had custody of the kids. He was fighting for custody, and then suddenly my kids started exposing
don't you bring?
Actually, I found one image, and that's when it started to occur to find out that my husband had exposed years ago that he was sexually abused by his own father, gained custody of him and his sister. He promised he would never do the same to my children. But of course, you know, you're in your 20s, you believe them. I was very naive to this subject, so I kind of automatically thought, well, if somebody hurt you that much, you would want to grow up and do the opposite. In my case, I hear that it's 99% of those that have been sexually abused, raised by the abuser, becomes an abuser or pedophilia themselves.
Yeah, I can back up.
I landed in Rhode Island for a 2-week vacation, and I walked into a trap in Rhode Island. I was just visiting my parents, as I usually did with my children. I was here to get an operation on my right foot, and my son needed an urgent operation. Within a week, I was being blocked from going to the police on this in Munich. So he prevented the police from taking my report. So I was being stalked daily, psychologically attacked. I don't speak German. I can't read German. He had emptied out the bank accounts. First thing they do, empty the bank account so you have no money. That was the first thing. Suddenly all the money was gone. All my money, all our money. Left me stranded with my children in the middle of nowhere, looking at the Austrian Alps. And I land in Rhode Island, and suddenly within a week, I was being, I went to the police. The moment I went to the police station, they confirmed that 3 images I had on my hands. At that point, I had nothing. I just had 2 weeks vacation and clothes. I was trapped in Rhode Island. I couldn't go back to Germany. He had found out they were stalking us. I went to the police station. They saw that a police officer identified 3 images as child porn, called the family court, woke the judge up in the middle of the night, got me a custody order, temporary custody order, and a restraining order against him. Well, within the same day, the next day I went to the courthouse, picked it up, and within that same day, he went to the Federal District Court of Rhode Island and filed an international kidnapping under the Hague Convention. Well, I didn't know about all this. Suddenly I'm getting orders placed at my parents' door telling me I have to hand over my children's passports to the court. In another court. I'd never seen a legal document yet in English, so I was very traumatized already with my children. And within 5 weeks and $1 million and his 9 law firms, I lost my kids and I never saw them again. I was prevented from going to the FBI in Boston. I was prevented from going to the police again to let them know what had happened. This judge, automatically I found out that he was up for a seat at the appeals court of the First Circuit of Boston. So we are talking about judges that take advantage, and lawyers who take advantage because of political advancement. I mean, who doesn't want a Hague under their belt? And who doesn't want to, when they found out he has money, well, I have the receipts because he sued me for the legal fees after. So he spent over $1 million within those 5 weeks. I know exactly who he paid. I know how much money they got, all to keep the secret.
That's right.
Mine's
my
a
case
secret,
is similar
too.
to this. We can talk about our own cases.
So
but
this
we're
is
here
what
to
I
present-
have been prevented. I did go to the state police. I came back. I went to Munich. They confirmed it's child porn. I went to the FBI in Berlin. I have their cards. They all said it's child porn. They told me to go back to the U.S. He's been stalking and finding me. I'm undercover. They sent me back. You can take a copy. They sent me back to the States to say, look, Tina, the Germans are not going to help you. You got to go back to the Rhode Island where they made the mistake. They gave him your children. Now, my children are American citizens. They're not German citizens.
So
The
it was,
passports were protected under Passport Protection Program. The judge handed my passports over to someone. That's Homeland Security. That's our Homeland Security. I'm an American with my kids in Rhode Island. I'm from native Rhode Island, and I didn't even get my own protection in my own country. So you know what the Germans did when he went back? They laughed at me. They pretty said, well, if the judges in America didn't believe you, why should we?
Right.
So 6 years I haven't seen my children. Once he found out that I went to the German police, the proper one in Munich, and they identified the entire huge book of child pornography, he hid my children, moved, and I have no idea. I have an idea where he is. Then I came back to Rhode Island. I went to the Cyber Task Force and State Police Ken Bell. He confirmed even just 3. And he also got very upset with these guardian ad litems that get picked as, and this Dr. Jenny from Hasbro Hospital, they pretty much knew that this was child porn, but because they got contracted and got money, and they were hired by him, they didn't disclose child pornography or child sexual abuse. It's mandated that when you see this, he said, you have to report it. Well, they didn't do that, and it was all about money.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what, I want you to see this, because it's been saving my life by having this. I want you to see what the courts saw. No, I mean, seriously,
You have to look
you
at this.
have to, because this is not fair.
Yeah, I don't know.
mean,
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is, this stuff is going on in Rhode Island, this is going on all over. And this is my testimony. My children are desperately crying for help. This was the custody order that the judge in federal court stayed my custody order. He saw this. They all saw this. This is the proof in Germany that there was child porn. The state police has a record too. See, they wrote down child pornography. The book is this big. I'm not technical, so I had to find help with no money for them to check the hard drive. We found hundreds more of not just my children, but other children. And this is the last letter and the only letter that my son reached me. I haven't had a phone call. I have not seen them. They're being isolated against their will. Every message I try to put on YouTube, he takes it down. Even this testimony that you will see on here, my ex-husband has taken it down. He's blocked it from being seen in Europe.
The judges are taking our children away from us.
Yes, and for this kind of money. Look, he hired 9 law firms. And these are the people he paid off.
And Mr. Tassani,
FBI investigating him. and I
but
don't
there's
know.
no outcome.
I have no idea.
And he was the one that was recruiting all of the kids. And the state police in Rhode Island were investigating him. Headlines, we never found an outcome. This man lied about his credentials of being a lawyer and was on with the Chief Bedrosian. And there was no discipline. You know, big headlines with the state police are investigating. That was 2 years ago. There's been no outcome. And he's done many, many, many cases of child pornography cases, child sexual abuse. And he gave them to the fathers, the very people who were sexually assaulting them.
So, I mean, there's a group of them that they work together. I got a certified paralegal's degree in 2008 because I had to figure out how could this be? How
You've
is
never
this
heard of this?
possible?
I haven't. You know, this is all really shocking.
And I had a gag order too.
I
was
illegal
without
gag
a
orders.
legal. I didn't have an attorney. I fired him in the courtroom because they refused to address this.
So, in your case, you said that the federal district court in Rhode Island gave custody of the kids
they let him go.
to your husband.
Yeah, they gave him temporary custody through a gag order. I wasn't even legally represented at the time. March 15th, a copy. Here I am. I have custody of my children.
The lawyers, yeah.
The lawyers
And the judges.
and the judges. How can I help
Why
you?
not Gloria start first?
Okay.
There's some really, really horrific judicial corruption going on in Rhode Island.
Okay.
It starts with the family court judges.
So these are state judges or are these federal judges?
Well, state at my level.
Okay. Okay.
Well, what happens is my ex-husband tried to kill me, and I found out that both of my kids were sexually assaulted for years by him, and the judge covered up a lot of evidence. And what happens with the federal money that comes into the state? There are 2 contracted psychologists that get their state money, but comes from federal, to do psych evals on women and children, and they're paid by the state, okay, which comes from federal money, and also they're billing commercial insurance companies, so they're double dipping. Then they are, when any child sexual abuse comes out that the kids disclose, they're not, they won't let them disclose. They say, they're thrown into this thing, it's called parental alienation syndrome, court-ordered threat therapy, and there's an outline by these contracted psychotherapists. The kids are court-ordered to reunify with their sex offender. My children were court-ordered to reunify with their sex offender, and there was a gag order put on me by the family court judge if I spoke about anything that was going on.
What happened to the appeal process?
There was no appeal.
There's no appellate court that oversees?
No. No. If I spoke or even took my kids to another doctor, the psychologist doesn't look at the kids' medical records.
What did your attorney say?
She was Karen Lynch. Now she's a family court judge. She was becoming family court judge when my daughter disclosed. She brought me into her office at 7:30 at night, and I have a recording of it, and she screamed and yelled at me that I turned this psychologist into the medical board. How dare I do that? My daughter was losing her hair. She couldn't eat. She wouldn't swallow pills. And she said, there's your boxes right there. Get the hell out. John and I don't want you as a client. And little did they know, I was recording all this. So I didn't have an attorney.
Did you hire another attorney who could help advocate your interests?
She charged me $40,000 retainer.
Wow. Rhode Island Legal Services?
No, there's no lawyer in Rhode Island that will touch my case because it's, quote, too political. The major crime squad had come to Rhode Island to speak to me about something else, another crime that happened in Connecticut, and I showed them my family court case. And day one, it was Sexual Assault and Trauma Center at the time, denied the detective the room to interview my kids. So the detective told me to put the kids in the car, bring them up to Bantam, which is the major crime squad in Connecticut, and they only deal with pedophiles and murderers, interviewed my children, had a report, I brought it back to Rhode Island, took it to North Kingstown Police Department. They said they don't have jurisdiction. Took it to the Scituate major crime squad. There's no investigation. He didn't penetrate her. Okay? So my daughter continued into these court-ordered threat therapy. He closed the shades on the kids. The kids would not conform. They were punished more. He gassed, the father was, my daughter broke. They broke my daughter. She had to be institutionalized. She was a National Honor Society student. And all because of money. Now she's disabled. Now we're having problems with getting ADA accommodations. She tried to testify. The kids both are suing their father for the crimes committed against them. They cannot get ADA accommodations through Julie Hammer at the Supreme Court level. There's another, because my daughter's now disabled at the age of 18, general statutes say that if a child is 18 years old, the father still has to continue with child support. But I have to prove that she's disabled. She's getting ORS funding at $20,000 for her post-secondary education a year. She is out of state now. And Julie Hamill, for her to testify on her own behalf on her cognitive and memory skills because of the post-traumatic stress, Julie Hamill wants to put a curtain up in between her and her sex offender. We have telephonic communications available. She was denied access to testify on her own behalf about her cognitive skills because Julie Hamill does not want to give my daughter ADA accommodations, so she went against federal law. My daughter had a medical letter from her doctor. She cannot be in the same room with her sex offender. Because we've been there, done that, and she was hospitalized, and it was $160,000.
Wow, that's not an easy time. That's an understatement.
But there's women that do this. They go through, I call it the meat grinder now, the family court. Kerry Raffinelli is bringing his mother around as a third-party witness. and he's a GAL. Maureen DeCristofaro is a GAL. Nothing happened to the kids. Never looked at documents, never looked at medical records, police reports, never looked at the father's background. He was...
And not a single attorney licensed to practice law in Rhode Island
No.
willing to take your case?
No.
This is
no.
no.
Okay.
They lose their license if they take our
try to
cases
go.
on.
They drop us in a couple of weeks as soon as they find out who's involved and what has been done, and they drop you.
You ever try law professors who are licensed to practice law in Rhode Island that may not necessarily live in Rhode Island?
We wouldn't be here
These are
forever.
crimes against children.
And
No.
and I'm saying,
What I'm saying is,
Yeah.
do you think that we would really be here if we haven't tried every
no,
avenue already?
look, I'm just,
We've
I'm
gone
I
asking-
mean, common sense, do you think
free
we'd drive
legal
over to Washington
service.
if we actually,
I've
we've
gone-
been doing this for 6 years, I think we hit everybody, including
I've gone
the
through
child
the
exploitation
federal
department,
money
the
that
children's
comes
issues,
in.
Department of Children's Issues,
for disabled.
everything.
I've contacted is it CAP for the disabled to advocate and for legal services.
I'll be honest, I don't know.
They've refused me.
So what in your email request, you said you had a legislative proposal that you wanted us to look
It's
at?
right there in the
Is
package.
this it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you guys want congressional hearings? Okay. Well, I will take a look at this.
You see, normal people that get out of domestic violence
Yeah.
go to the family court asking for help,
Yeah.
not to become disabled. Now we are completely disabled. We can't find jobs. We don't have ADA advocates. They deny us access to the ORS, Office of Rehabilitation Services.
And this is a common experience not only in Rhode Island, but in states across the nation. 58,000 children each year are being given into the custody of batterers and molesters. We've been in the Capitol lobbying for children's rights, and the protective mothers that report the sexual abuse have been unable to protect their own children. We're asking the president and anybody with the power to change this to stop these grievous human rights violations that are going on. It amounts to child trafficking. They're making tons of money through the Department of Health and Human Services on our children. When we report abuse, we lose custody. They use alienation against you. They did in my case. And my 11-year-old son hasn't seen mommy in 4 years. They put the protective parent on supervised visitation at a great cost, $75 an hour. And they just impoverish us, and they're trying to starve and freeze us to prevent us from having the means of fighting back. What you see here are some tough women who are still standing after being taken through the meat grinder, as Gloria says.
James, my case is international. Mine is at a federal court level, but also began at Rhode Island Family Court when I don't even have residency in the U.S. I left the U.S. in 1994 and moved to Germany, Munich, Germany, with my future husband, who's a Bavarian, that I met in Hong Kong on a business trip. I'm a designer, fashion designer, so I traveled to Asia every 3 months for over 20 years. So I come from a normal background, high honors, went to Rhode Island School of Design, graduated, had a very successful career, but even those women like me, we don't know a narcissist. We weren't brought up, we didn't grow up in that environment. So I didn't know, I was shocked to find out this exists. So I know this could be a little shocking and almost unbelievable to you when we address these issues, because you think this can't possibly happen in America. But it is a global virus. It's not just here, it's also in other countries.
Sure.
I got my paralegal's degree at EU in 2008, so, because I had to find out why. So when I say to you, I wouldn't be here right now,
Sure.
if it hasn't gotten to a level where an ex parte federal court, while I'm visiting my parents, because I'm a native Rhode Islander, I've been coming every 3 months with my children,